very much like the morning after the night before, and I can't think of a more appropriate subject that we should be talking about, given the context of yesterday's announcements and the likely impact that's going to have on our sector. So good to be here with my colleagues, who I'll introduce in a second, but we're really keen to hear from you about the challenges you're facing around fundraising and particularly unrestricted income, which is increasingly the holy grail of our sort of funding portfolio. So just to say, we'll be recording this session. We'll do about 30 minutes of presentation. The idea is the session should run for about 60 minutes, but if we've got a good discussion going, then we can extend that. But yeah, keen to hear from my colleagues. So I'm going to introduce Chris from MZN, consultancy and B Corp that we've been working with for quite some time. And he will introduce his colleagues, but I'm going to hand over to Chris now to kick off the session, and look forward to talking to you later. If you do have questions, drop them in the Q&A box and we'll pick those up as we go along. Thanks very much. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Mike. And good morning, good afternoon, everybody here from Hamburg. I'm pleased to come together in as much as we can come together again in these times. Today we're talking about new fundraising approaches to grow income in these times, which are undoubtedly difficult. And I'm really pleased to today be joined by my colleague Caroline, who's waving, and my friend Tom.
Hello.
Who's also married to a colleague of mine. It's all a bit incestuous, frankly. But before we start, I just want to say these are unprecedented and difficult times. Sorry, I did get tested. And for myself, my family, all of us at MZN, I just want to say outright, we're with you. We are sending you socially distanced hugs. These are difficult times yet again. And let's just say it what it is. It's hard, it's long slog, and it sucks. I'll just say it out straight. And many of our NGO partners we are working with feel that in the office, or what is left of the office, feel a funding squeeze, feel like we are taking care of children as well as worrying about the bills, quite possibly worrying about our jobs, as well as worrying most about our beneficiaries. So before we even start here, this is acknowledged. We can't change everything, but not always putting on the brave face, but we are with you here for my colleagues everywhere around the world. And I hope, and I'm pretty sure that together, this too shall end. Right, now to the topic. We are, MZN, as I said today, joined by Tom and Caroline, and then there are other people around the world, as you see, from Dhaka to Michael, who's celebrating Thanksgiving today, to my colleague Anyana, who I just want to raise out as well, because she's got tested positive with COVID today, but she's doing well. And that's the team that you have and may have seen various times. Good. So this is our talking points today. After having acknowledged that this is a difficult time, I want to say this is also an opportunity. And then I want to go the analysis part. So the German accountant is taking step one about analyze what exactly the challenge is. My colleague Caroline will take you to step two. Just get better at what you're already good at. That's probably a good pragmatic tip in terms of fundraising. And in step three, we want to innovate, and I'm really pleased today to hear about two innovations, one from Tom and one from our colleagues in Sweden, that may inspire you. Good. Having acknowledged that these are difficult times, I also want to acknowledge that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. This is a crisis, is always an opportunity. And for us in the sector, let's be honest with each other. We have been talking about various pieces and various areas of reforms for decades: funding diversification, operating like a platform, tackle scaling or the failure to scale, localization, being serious about it, reforming our membership structure, becoming more business savvy, partnering more with other new donors or corporate sector, or build a charity business to feed in. And these challenges always seemed important. Very often, for some of our colleagues, that never seemed urgent enough to take on in spite, because after all, there's enough to do, right? Now, this crisis, which will not go away, unfortunately, anytime soon, and which will be deepened next year by a biting Brexit. You know, I'm a fountain of cheerful news today. This crisis is also an opportunity to tackle these fundamental problems. And yes, they won't solve the problem tomorrow. There is no silver bullet or quick fix, but they are an opportunity to finally engage our colleagues, engage ourselves, engage our wider network to tackle them. And with that in mind, I want to tell you a little story. I have the privilege of working with amazing people around the world, in the NGO sector, in the development sector, and some in the social business sector, who are going through these times with you. And in March 2020, we had a conversation. I can't say which organization it is, but this is quite typical. We had a conversation with a UK organization, mid-sized NGO. They approached us, saying funding is our problem. Good, okay. In April, we did a bit of analysis. We engaged. We requested documents. Obviously, we couldn't travel, and we engaged and found that there is a failure to scale and innovate, not just since COVID, but actually since the last 5-6 years. The organization has grown by like 5, 10, 15%. Then in June, we did a workshop. And in the workshop, it became very apparent that the processes around business development, and in fact, all processes, are incredibly slow. And then in September, just recently, we did a board meeting where we have presented the core, saying we need to digitalize and work like a platform, speed up the processes, put decision power in the hands of the business development proposal writers, not in streamline the authorities required, so that the funding proposal delivery time gets cut down from previously 60 to 90 days to 15. A significant improvement and a clear scale. So I'm just sharing this experience because it was typical. There was one problem, and it actually was, the underlying problem was the fact that the internal processes were too slow, were too cumbersome, were too authoritative. Therefore, I want to encourage everybody, just first of all, when they're thinking about fundraising, pinpoint the problem. Where do we experience the lack of funding, and what type of funding do we actually need? What mixture between unrestricted and restricted do you need? What can you change now in the way how you deliver your programs? Can you digitalize your program delivery partially? That requires different sort of funding. What is your ideal funding mix, as I said, and what capacities do you need internally to then achieve that funding? These are poignant questions that not project the problem at the outside world, at the donors, but actually say, okay, what can we do about it? This is difficult, this, as I said, this sucks, but what can we do about it internally? So I would like to encourage everybody, and that's what we've done with our clients this year in particular, in 2020, to prioritize capacities, not outcomes. First of all, we can't fully control outcomes, and we can't fully control the environment. We can't even control the environment at all. But we can control our internal capacities and our income generating capacities, how good we are with opportunity identification, how good we are building new fundraising schemes, how good we are at innovating new income streams, how good we are partnering with the corporate sector, how good we are at identifying philanthropic partners. These we can control, and I wouldn't worry about the outcome immediately. That income will eventually follow. And of course, we've had amazing conversations, in the workshop in May, June with this particular UK-based client. We had a really fantastic plethora of ideas that the idea holders, the employees said, we've had these ideas for months, if not years. There's just no space here. There's just no space where we can have the time to go away for a day or two and just explore and just try this out, explore if this works. And my colleague Caroline will speak to that later. Good. Over to you, Caroline.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so I'm going to pick up where Chris left off. So the first point I would like to make is then when you get into this journey to think about what can we actually do, the one thing is focus on what you're already doing well, do it better. So my experience with a lot of clients that we've been working with is they haven't even analyzed where the main income streams come from. And if, for example, your income is still, let's say, 80% from institutional donors, even though we're going to talk about how to change that, look at it and see if you're doing well there. If you have managed to raise most of your money from institutional donors, is there anything you can improve and can do better? Can you improve your proposals? Don't just do copy and paste. These are different times. You want to also innovate how you do your fundraising. Can you be more efficient? Is there a way of engaging your donors? It's kind of, if you have your donors for a long time, you often get into kind of a rod of things, and things just you do it the way you've always done it. And, is there a new newsletter you can send out, another email, have a Zoom date, so that, you're on their radar and you do it better than last year's proposal, and they know that you're there and that you stand out going forward. And the next point, diversify for real and for long term. So we've been talking about diversification in fundraising probably for the past decade or longer, but have you really done it? So now is the time to do it. And diversification means, can mean a whole lot of things, and you'll hear a few examples also in this presentation, of course, but it's really all about doing it, investigating. And it means not just saying we're going to do online fundraising, but diversifying means making a plan. So planning for the new strategy, which income source, which strategy you want to follow. And then you have to put, that's what Chris said, capacity and probably also a little bit of money towards it so that it works. And so that's a key strategy to follow. And diversification, as we've seen in the crisis, is so important because, if your one income stream decreases or fails, then you have something to fall back onto. If your challenge is raising unrestricted funds, which I know is one of the biggest challenges that most NGOs face, is one that you can overcome sometimes if you speak to your long-term institutional donors. So you might have a relationship with some, you receive project funding or restricted funding for many, many years. Have you ever tried to go to them and speak to them and say, look, we've been good partners. You've seen our reporting. You have given us money year on year. Can we turn this money into unrestricted funds? And what it means sometimes is you still have to provide a proposal. Maybe you have to give your, let's say, multi-year strategy or your annual plan. But then you enter into contract where you say, we're going to deliver into against this plan in the broader sense, but you can use the money you receive for whichever money you need. So it can go to salaries, it can go to your office costs, but they know you and they know you will deliver. And of course, at the end of the year, you still have to report against the broader plan, but your money is unrestricted and you can be a bit more flexible, which I think in these times, donors are even more open to enter into discussion to. Then if restricted income is falling, look where you can improve your business development processes. So other things, and that goes a bit back to also what I said earlier about focus on what you're already doing, is there anything you can do better? What are things that need to improve in your process so that your project funds continue coming? And have a good relationship again with your donors, because if you are the one not just to send in the report on time, and I mean, we'll assume that's a given, but you're the one that actually offers the insight, that goes to your donors and says, look, we've been working with children in this pandemic, we've seen this and that happening. So if you're the one that has the insight and analysis, you're the go-to organization, not just because you get money from them, but you know what you're doing, then you remain on the radar, and they will potentially continue giving you the project funding, and they will not just have you on the tick list of, okay, we're giving them money every year. So yeah, next slide.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so linked to that, MZN has a dashboard where it collects data from its clients and many NGOs it works with. And there are two interesting findings that kind of support also today's talk. So the first one is NGOs who regularly reallocate more than 30% of their budget recover up to 9 times in restricted funding. So so they recover 9 times faster. And the second point that we found, NGOs who added on average 2 new income streams each year between 2015 and 2019 added on average 3 in 2020. So if you think about that, that means that's NGOs that are innovative and that are moving, that are responding to what's happening around them and to the environment, and not only doing that now in the pandemic, they have started doing it before, but it is definitely encouragement to the NGOs that haven't started, do it now, start now. So what does it mean? Increase, and that speaks to the point that Chris made about capacity, increase how many proposals you can do per month. So it's not about just the outcomes, the basically funding you confirm, but try and increase the capacity of your people in your organization to write proposals, to get proposals out. Of course, high quality proposals, but get them out there and make sure that you also engage new donors or engage your donors in a different way. And then invest in innovation. So what can you do to really move the mark of what you have been doing in the past? Other innovations, again, times have changed, and if you can show as an organization that you've put in thought of, the pandemic has had an impact on so many areas, countries, regions, beneficiary groups, what does it actually mean, and how can you innovate? How can you think inside out, basically upside down and inside out? So don't try and do the same things over, but really innovate. And is there room for a group in your organization, a small project team, to innovate and to spend some time doing that, so that you again are on the radar of potential new donors, funders, corporates, and potential partners going forward.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Carolyn. That's much appreciated. I find the first found that really interesting when that came out this October, when we looked at our dashboards of our advisory partners, and we found that those NGOs who are more nimble, who allocate a substantial part of their funding, every year on year, so they're used to change more than maybe some others, they also recover far faster in restricted funding towards this since sort of summer this year. And that really speaks volumes to the fact that, we can put some control on this crisis. We are not subject to it purely. There is things we can do. Some of the things aren't even rocket science, just investing in as many proposals as you can do, like you said, Caroline. Yeah, that makes total sense. If you can do more proposals, the funding will follow. That is not rocket science. Cool. Now, we promised you some innovation and some ideas and some inspiration. This is the data. This is the sort of message there behind it. And Tom, a friend of mine who runs a crowdfunding website, lots of experience with crowdfunding, kindly agreed to be part of this chat to share his experience in what crowdfunding can actually do. And then afterwards, I want to deliver another example of a Swedish organization that we work with, that could also serve as inspiration maybe for you. Tom, all over to you.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much. So I guess I get the fun bit to talk about, really, crowdfunding. But It's I think crowdfunding is often kind of seen in a bit of an innovative light in charity circles, and often charities aren't really sure what to do with crowdfunding. I just want to tell you a little bit about it. So it's always sort of one tool amongst many tools that you have as a charity to innovate or do something differently, and it's never going to form the majority of your income, let's say, but it's great for a few different things. In particular, crowdfunding is great when it comes to building relationships, and whether that's about sort of developing the existing relationships you have as a charity with, let's say, major donors or individual small donors, or even institutional partners or delivery partners, whatever it is. Whether it's about developing those existing relationships you have, or whether it's about starting new relationships too. It's a really, really good sort of system for doing that. And I'll show you a few examples in a second. But so sometimes charities also find it helpful for sort of raising the overall public profile of what they're doing too. And often you can get, you know, for example, like celebrities and things like that involved in the promotion of new projects that you've got going on. And sometimes with bigger charities, they'll use crowdfunding to test out ideas that they just find really hard to get funded from other places, perhaps because, let's say, grant funders find it quite risky to fund their new project that they want, or maybe they want to see a bit of public support behind your idea first. So crowdfunding can be used to test new projects which are just difficult to get funding for elsewhere. The beauty of that is you can then you can then show the results of your crowdfunding once you've built up a bit of public support, and you can demonstrate that through some kind of campaign. You can take that to major donors, let's say, and kind of get them excited about the idea too. So, so on the next slide, I'll just show you a few different examples of this. Kind of a mix of smaller charities and bigger charities, but each of these examples that I've worked with in the last year, they all sort of used crowdfunding in a slightly different way. So Water for Rojava, really interesting project. It was a collaboration between 5 different charities. In fact, one of them was social enterprise. They're all on the sort of medium sort of size of charity, I suppose. What the project allowed them to do was, first of all, cement a relationship between them to deliver a project together, which was a really big deal for making sure that the project actually came together. It was also a chance for them to share audience to some extent, if all of them are kind of cross-promoting this one individual project. And then the donors, you know, come along to the campaign. It's kind of a chance to introduce their base to other charities who are doing sort of similar work, and kind of grow the overall sort of base of supporters for these charities. So they ended up raising, you know, I don't know, just over 100 grand. But what they managed to do was they had a major donor who was sort of sitting on the fence. It was actually a kind of corporation who was interested in giving them some money, but they'd been sitting on the fence for about 6 months, maybe a year, and they weren't really sure how to develop this relationship. Well, what they did was they suggested to the corporate donor that they essentially match funded all of the individual donations that they got from the crowd, you know, from the public, and the corporation kind of found that a really exciting way to get involved in the project, because they could have essentially used their donation to incentivize more people to come and leave a donation, kind of create a bigger impact overall. So for these guys, it was about sort of accelerating the existing relationships they had and getting people to kind of commit and go ahead with a project. I think in part this works because a crowdfunder, you know, any campaign page really is a very stripped down, simplified version of what you're doing. And so it makes it a really easy way to communicate whatever project that you've got going on. And it makes a really handy icebreaker, because there's something that's going on right now. So you can certainly use it in these ways. On the right-hand side, Code Brave. So this is a slightly different example, actually. But what they did was they used their existing professional connections to basically drum up support for a new fundraising arm that they were launching in the UK. They're actually a Lebanon-based charity. But through essentially sort of mobilizing and having kind of deeper discussions with their existing networks to try and drum up some funding for their new fundraising arm, they actually found a few candidates for major donors again, and they actually found that one of their followers that had been following them for the last sort of 3 years or so actually worked for Microsoft in Silicon Valley as one of the CTOs or something, and he alone was able to put in 50 grand into their project. But that's the start of a much longer term relationship. So I think the way to think about crowdfunding is that it's great for, sure, you can raise funds immediately and all that kind of stuff, and it could be unrestricted funds. That's great, short-term revenue, but it can also form part of your sort of longer-term assets, especially when it comes to relationships and developing that side of things. In the middle is a sort of radically different example, really. NSPCC, I sort of had the pleasure to work with last year, and they were launching a new sort of awareness campaign for. And so we were sat down in their boardroom discussing sort of new ways that they could promote out the campaign and excite the public about what they were doing. And we came across this idea of launching Pantosaurus. I don't know if you've ever heard the YouTube song, but it's one of the most catchy tunes of all time. I think it could probably rival Baby Shark. But so they decided to launch a children's book alongside. They sold the children's book in advance of actually producing the book, and obviously use that to kind of use crowdfunding to kind of finance the whole campaign before they even had to have any costs for it. And so it's really nice way of sort of testing the ground with new ideas. And that allowed them to go out to major donors and say, hey, there's loads of public support behind this. Why don't you help us take it out onto a much wider scale? That's exactly what they did too. But I think that kind of wraps it up, really.
Very cool. Thanks, Tom. That's really, really awesome. And I really love the breadth of experience there. I'm going to definitely Google the Pantosaurus song after this webinar.
Oh, I'll link you to it.
Yeah. I'll make that my ringtone when you call. Fantastic. We've got some questions about the fundraising there already, so I'll definitely know we go back to you. Also, as an inspiration session for the last sort of 5 minutes, I wanted to share an experience I had with a charity in Sweden, where I worked this summer on it, and they used they set up a business effectively. What they've done is, you may have heard about this, they've had a long-standing business called Humanium Metal. There's a whole website. If you Google it, you'll find it immediately. Run by IAM, the charity, and for a number of years they've been collecting firearms. They're a disarmament and gun violence charity. And originally they used to have the problem in the west of Africa, years ago this was, to say, well, what do we do with all this metal? Decommissioning firearms is a cost. It's difficult. You'd obviously need to handle it with care for obvious reasons, securely. It's a huge cost. Until they said, look, hang on, all this metal, this is worth something. Can we produce or melt it together and sell it? The real innovation there lay years ago, where they said, we will sell the metal, we will not try to produce a product. Initially, they went down the scale of producing these watches, Humanium 39, you see down there as an example, and they've diversified recently. And this is the innovation they've developed recently, saying, hang on, we're not really a watch producer. We can actually produce a charitable, a good metal that comes from recycled guns, so it's green as well. And we can produce these, set up these melting furnaces in Guatemala, for example. They've done the first one, and export that metal back to the markets, and then left established jewelry brands or stationery brands use that metal as part of their products to advertise, and they just put a whole campaign around it on Humanium. Now, the reason I'm sharing this is not something that's been done within 3 months. This is the more longer term, but like all other organizations, this year was is really hard. And it turns out that the Humanium Metal business as part of the organization also suffered initially, particularly because the organization runs, fair trade shops and runs other fundraising steps that were massively called back. The door-to-door business, the door-to-door charity raising, the charity events, all of these didn't work in 2020 and likely not going to work for much of 2021. But it was the Humanium Metal, as you see from excerpt there from the recently released financial reports, that actually saved them a bit. You see, this is it increased in sales almost double. They've gotten into the innovation of not just producing the watches, but producing the metal itself and delivering that to fashion and stationery and any other business wanting to add that to their product line, meant significant more income. And I couldn't be more pleased to hear that charitable business, which revenue, of course, is entirely unrestricted and it's repeatable and it's permanent, actually results in 2019 to have fundraising income of slightly more than last year. So it hasn't grown at the pace it has done since 2015, but it has still not declined, in fact, slightly increased, pretty much matched it basically. And that is a major olive branch that was far more useful than anticipated 5 years ago. Then it was a sideshow. It was a uncooked business, and frankly, the investments there were considered skeptical by many in the organization. Allocating that outside of the main charity, turning it into a metal business, effectively into a raw commodity sale business for fashion brands, did not only mean that they reduced the costs of their primary mission because they could hand over the weapons to the metal furnace rather than decommissioning it, exporting it, expertly taking it apart, but also raise significant funding. And that was a very good, and I thought a very innovative way to raise more funds, to make yourself less dependable on restricted funding, and to establish a permanent, ongoing stream of unrestricted income. What's also interesting here, what I'd like to note, is the fact that this innovation didn't come as one big burst. It came as a series of innovations, a series of ideas, and constant chipping away at it. And we are where we are. And I'm sure Humanium Metal will branch out and try out new things again in 2021. Good. That's it. I really hope that we've stuck to a half an hour or so. Yep. I really hope that this provided some data to ponder about, some inspiration to take away from, as well as some practical tips to go about now. We're around about 125 people on this webinar. There are some questions I can see already. Over to you, Mike, and then we'll see and dip in and out of these slides as we need to.
Great. Thanks, Chris, Tom, and Carolyn. I think it's really interesting. I've got some great questions, actually. But I'd like to start with one of the questions that came in sort of most recently, actually, from David Evans. He's this is almost an existential question about the way organisations function. So he's saying if half of the medium-sized organisations are going to go to the wall, boards may be extremely risk-averse and allergic to investment in fundraising. You know, how do you persuade your organisation to break that logjam and invest and shift resources into new ways of working? I mean, I think an inert board at this point is probably condemning an organisation to a sort of death spiral, I would have thought. But you know, for somebody in David's position, how would you advise? How would you persuade those who are making these decisions to kind of unlock resources to provide the potential for the organisation to survive?
I'd like to take that question, and Caroline, you can maybe also come in from your work with our clients, which are at a middle to smaller scale, and I work with a middle to larger scale. That's okay, Caroline? Yeah, look, that is a question. I think it goes straight to the matter, David. I'm not sure which organization you work for or work at, but you're right. That is what we always see. Innovation is inherently costly. It can fail, and let's face it, 40% of the charity businesses do fail. Like the one with IR Metal. I meant it wasn't a success on day one, far from it. Yes. The question I would raise is the same question as you do with training. What if you train all your staff and then they leave? The answer is, well, what if you don't and they don't? What if you do not invest? I generally don't think that hat in the sand is going to get us out of there. The world will definitely look very different in 2022. And then the next crisis comes, and then the next. This is constantly changing. We must be more entrepreneurial. And our data clearly suggests that those NGOs, as we showed, that change more often also are more successful. They are serving their beneficiaries better. So the data is there. We got it. I'm happy to share it with you as much as we can within the confines of confidentiality. And the argument couldn't be more obvious. In pragmatic terms, we do this, however, sometimes with risk-adverse steps. For example, we have some NGOs, they are mainly on the board, they're mainly UN or former UN people. They are inherently a little bit more careful. So maybe you refer to this. We do this in baby steps. We ask for a 30 days exploration fund. Costs 5,000. It's not a big thing. Let's explore some ideas. Give the space for 10 ideas to be generated and scoped out. Upon approval there, we go for a 3 months inception process. Okay, that costs a little bit more. These are the ideas. These are the concrete plans that we couldn't deliver to you 2 months ago when we just did the 30-day sprint. After a 3 months scoping process or inception process, we go for the first year of innovation hub, or where we advance the top contenders, the charitable business, the crowdfunding campaign, the income diversification, the new program in that new country, etc., etc. The organization I've just presented, IM, didn't only change its humanitarian metal business substantially in 2020, converting it from the sale of watches to the sale of metal. It's a huge change, but also opened 2 new country offices in a year where until August, this looked really dire. This looked really bad. And they're investing their way out of it. And the comment on the board that was made in September was, well, I guess there's no real way to save our way out of this. And I think that took a while to come through. In a nutshell, if we do nothing, well, as a consultant, may I say personally, I'd rather be blamed for something we did do than something we didn't do. Yeah. Caroline, do you wanna?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't have much to add, but I would also say it's an opportunity. As Chris said earlier, this is also an opportunity. So, the world faces a major crisis. So sometimes to go to your board in a really, to really paint the picture of what's happening, not just in the world, but what does it mean for your organization. And I think this is a time to really get innovation going. Even organizations that are risk averse or that don't really like change, I think, everyone has experienced what 2020 was all about. And so it is a good time to push your board and say, look, now is really the time and we can't wait longer. So that's the one way of really getting the board to think about innovation and to move ahead. And also sometimes depending what your board is, how your board is constituted, if you have a number of people that are maybe not so much involved actually in the NGO world, but rather come from the corporate side, there's also a good way of using the corporate world, because in the corporate world, if something goes wrong, corporates don't sit and wait or don't, they innovate, they push, and NGOs shouldn't be different. And sometimes that also helps if your board is constituted of people from the corporate sector to use a corporate example and say, this is the same. We can't just sit and wait it out. So, yeah.
Caroline, do you get the impression that sometimes our mid-sized, smaller NGOs, particularly those in the Middle East or in sort of, developing countries, tend to be a little bit quicker off the mark than the large established ones with boards and authority processes?
It depends. I mean, they can be, because they often have fewer bureaucratic processes. So they have also often a much closer relationship to their boards, because it's obviously the fewer layers in the organization. However, also in boards, it really depends on the type of board members I think you have, because you can have a mid-size NGO, and if the board members are very conservative or very much kind of on the board for the past 30 years and we've been doing things like we have been doing, then even in that size it's sometimes difficult to get organizations moving.
I think also just the bond research was referred to just before. I think one of the questions we asked was to what extent organizations had reallocated resources during the lockdown and COVID crisis. And actually it tended to be the smaller organizations that had reallocated resources. And particularly in the face of not being able to run face-to-face events and do face-to-face fundraising, that they had to think on their feet and act rapidly. So in some ways it's led them, almost from an existential point of view, it's led to them being agile and innovative and moving things around quite quickly. And I know that's not necessarily every organization, but there's definitely evidence of smaller organizations having to adapt and being relatively successful at it.
Let's share one more example, Mike, whilst we're talking about this. I'm working with an organization in the Nordics countries, again, close to home where I live here. And they've taken the experience saying, hang on, we are saving lots of money because we're not in the office anymore, we're not traveling anymore. So they're actually making the board resolution, in this quarter, saying we will never travel cross-continental again. We are taking localization serious, and we are doing this is happening. That saves X much money next year. And that money we're investing into new things this year. And that's a way to convince the board, because they just acknowledged, if you want to, for climate reasons as well, let's not forget about the climate crisis, please. Let's acknowledge that these intercontinental flights to do a workshop in Kenya are really inherently unsustainable. Unless you're based in Kenya, Caroline, you're based in South Africa, do the workshop there. But, I live in Hamburg. Unless I can't go there by train, I'm not going to go there.
Just before we go on to crowdfunding, and there's quite a lot of questions for you, Tom. Just one last question that's come in here relates to this: is what funding opportunities do you see as innovative beyond grants and individual corporate funding?
Well, innovative is not principally what is new, but also what represents a scalable arm for me. So if we are running one event that we can happen to do in that particular week, because right now in the summer, the lockdown rules are relaxed for a month and we can do it before everybody gets infected again, that's not innovation to me. When we're doing something changed that is scalable, we can do this for a long time and we can scale it from the current event to this, then that would meet my definition of innovation. And please note, it doesn't matter whether that innovation is actually successful or not. Humanium Metal, the one I presented, at first, for a year and a half, wasn't successful. It was a serious, in fact, I can take my own, to be very honest, when I started Amsterdam, it wasn't successful. There was a series of small steps innovation that continuously gets you better at what you originally thought about. So when a new idea hits scalability, that matches my preference for innovation. And
I mean, the question also, I think around funding stream innovations, I mean, as it was presented, another idea maybe that I've worked with a few clients is, so if you offer, for example, workshops on, I've worked with a client who did stuff on diversity and inclusion. And I mean, as you know, this has been a big topic in 2020. I mean, should not have been just in 2020, but it has been. So they now run workshops actually with corporates or whoever actually approaches them, schools, and they get paid for it. So that's a new income stream and that's innovation. So they still do the workshops with their beneficiaries, of course, for free. But then they have this other arm where they can now offer something they're already good at. They don't need much time or effort to develop those courses. and they can offer it to corporates. And if you think along those lines, in some instances, kind of products that you use or produce for your beneficiaries, is there any of those that you can offer to to other type of clients, if you would use that language? So those are kind of innovations. And then also individual, you said, is it just individual or grants? But in individual giving or crowdfunding, when Tom will now, I have to answer a whole host of questions there. Individual giving is not individual giving in one go. So you have your online, you have your mass campaigns, you have your crowdfunding, but individual giving is also your high net worth individuals. So have you done a network analysis with your board? Who knows who? Remember the 6 degrees of separation? Who can you go and knock at the door? Via. So often it's not, your board knows. And so those are small innovations that can, give you the bigger donor gifts and so on that you can think of within this type of fundraising.
And just to be clear, Caroline is not advocating a perfect way to spread the virus, okay? But who knows who, and then knocking on each other's door. Just
Great, thanks, Karen. Tom, I've got some questions for you. I mean, first of all, can you just say a bit more about the, what are the good crowd funding platforms that are out there, and particularly in relation to the complexities of gift aid and how that works? What would you recommend people to look at?
Well, I mean, I have to first of all say that I'm massively biased here because I mainly spend my time being a project coach for crowdfunder.co.uk. But there are loads of platforms out there. There's so things like Just Giving, things like Global Giving is brilliant. There's in fact, I'm blanking on like half of the platforms out there. There are so many. I would say Google them. I would say just find something that you're comfortable with. That feels good. Definitely have a look at like their fee structures, because a lot of the platforms have hidden fees. Some of the platforms make it really easy to access additional funding. So for example, like I know Crowdfunder, we have like a whole program of partner funds that will give you some match funding towards your campaign and stuff like that. I think just find something that you're comfortable with. In terms of gift aid, how it usually works is the project owner will get like a sort of the data that you'll need to redeem the gift aid yourself will be kind of collected by that campaign, essentially. So it'll give you the ammunition or the data that you'll need to kind of pick up the gift aid yourself. Most of the time, that's how it works. But some platforms will kind of redeem that gift aid automatically for you, but they'll also charge you in the process. So I would just say, have a look, do a little bit of research, find 2 or 3 platforms and kind of make a choice based on that. That's not a clarified go with this option. And if I was to say that, I'd obviously say go with Crowdfunder, but then I'm super biased. So.
Steph Avis has got a really interesting question here. How does crowdfunding work when you don't really have a crowd? So if you're a small niche organization with not necessarily having a sort of wide group of supporters or wide set of people that know your work, how does that work? What's the best approach there?
Absolutely. Okay, so essentially crowdfunding is about multiplying the audience that you already have. That's not to say that you don't have an audience already. So for any campaign, the first half of your campaign is going to be about talking to your existing audience, because they're the easiest people to kind of get to support your cause, and then using those audiences or finding new audiences in the second half of the campaign. And the second half of the campaign is about putting up those first-time donors. So generally campaigns work like that. If you're just starting out, you still have a whole base of professional connections, people who have known your story for starting up this charity in the first place, or trustees, that you can use to kind of help you sort of propel the initial bit of the campaign forward. And actually, what I found is sort of working with charities of various sizes, national to very local. The very local are often fantastic at crowdfunding in ways that national charities, for many of the reasons that Chris and Carolyn have been describing as well, this sort of slow pacedness and lack of innovation and things like this. Sometimes national charities are much worse at crowdfunding than smaller size charities. So it's about making use of your existing networks, your existing connections, Yeah, that's part of the fun of running these types of campaigns.
Great, and just a question from Ollie is, what are the distinct benefits of crowdfunding versus having a good quality appeal page on your website? Is one more static and one more outbound? Is that the sort of is that the difference?
I think I'd see crowdfunding. It's not to say that they're sort of mutually exclusive. In fact, they overlap quite a lot, right? I think this is quite a common question. I see crowdfunding as a sort of a new way of doing that ongoing appeal page. Very simple reason behind it. It actually is rooted in marketing psychology, to be honest with you. But there are three things that make it different to having a static appeal page where you're just asking for donations. Generally speaking, there's a time limit, right? So there's a thing that's happening right now. That not only mobilizes your crowd to give you donations for a particular appeal, but it also mobilizes your team to promote it out during that time. Everyone kind of feels engaged with the process, and the momentum builds because of that. It's also about having a set target and showing donors very transparently how far of the way you are towards that target. And of course, a lot of charities do that on their appeal pages too. And it's also about showing who else has backed this campaign. And that forms the social proof behind your campaign. So what we see from crowdfunders is they tend to convert at maybe about 10% or maybe about 15% or something like that. The average donation page on a charity website, at least the charities that I've worked with, would usually get about sort of 5%, something like that. So, and again, that's reflected in the average donation amount as well, typically about £25, can be as high as £50 average donation versus a charity campaign. Well, to be fair, that sort of ranges. Sometimes you get big donors and all sorts of stuff, yeah, so a few differences. Generally, it'll just get you a better conversion rate at the end of the day.
Great, thanks, Simon. Just one final question, but I mean, a lot of what when Chris and I have done webinars together, a lot of what we've talked about is having the right structures in place, rethinking the way your organisation is structured. So, what kind of structure do you have to have in place to make a crowdfunding project work? What do you need? Do you need to sort of readjust the way you think about things? What do you need to do internally to give yourself the best chance of success?
Okay, that's a fantastic question, I'd say. So I think it's different for every organization, but I think the things that unify good campaigns and the good project teams behind campaigns, generally speaking, for something as simple as a crowdfunding campaign, you want to have like one person in charge of doing it, someone who's pretty motivated and pretty tenacious about kind of, getting the word out there about the campaign. So it's usually one person in charge, very, very small team, very nimble team. It's not 15 people who all form the fundraising department. It's one person. And often that person is not the fundraising director. It's often someone within the team. So I'd say, keep it small and nimble. That's a good thing. And also the rest of the team should do what they can to support that person who's running the team. That forms such a big part of it. You can never tell how, when I'm working with clients, you never really can tell the internal workings of a team until you start working with them. But I'd say that's the unifying thing, just to have someone who's super tenacious on your team and just give them the campaign to run.
I think that speaks to this agility, this small thing as well. We've noticed that innovation and getting things done that are finite, in this case, a crowdfunding website, works much better as a small outlayer squad, which is obviously, we're now back to our previous webinars, how we turn agile, static organizations into more agile beasts. And agility in and by itself is largely about operating innovative at scale. And therein lies the problem, because small organizations are inherently more innovative because they are small, they have to be, but they also don't reach the scale. How do we match these two? So like Tom said, having a small person directly reportable, ideally I would add to this, Tom, with some pretty clear metrics.
Yeah.
Isn't all well, it's not go free, is a good way, not just to do crowdfunding, but also to do other kinds of innovation. Have your little hub team, and all the major companies you see out there in the world have their innovation teams. set aside from the organizational matrix that produce a constant stream of disruption, which is good.
Yeah.
Great. Just a question in the context of what happened yesterday. This is a question from me. So, what do you think NGOs' approach should be towards seeking UK government funding in the context of such large-scale cuts? Because I think one of the just using the example of Bond, 10 years ago when Andrew Mitchell was Secretary of State, Bond had a grant from DFID. That grant was cut, and actually in some ways it resulted in greater diversification in Bond's funding model, and the way it had more of a portfolio approach to the different income streams, and it was actually set Bond up to be much more sustainable as a result of not being obsessed by seeking government funding. And I know not everybody on this call will be seeking government funding, but I just wonder, what in an organization's portfolio, where do you think in this new context government funding should sit? How important is it?
Well, Mike and Claudine, you can speak plenty to this as well. We work a lot with organizations, and one of the questions I asked, I think pretty early on in this webinar, was get your funding mix right. So grants and restricted funding will always form a part of an implementing or project running INGO. And that's good because it provides far more than just funding. It provides access to governments, a constant advocacy change, they're mutually reinforcing. That's fine. What you can't have are two things. I would be pretty surprised. There are some examples, but the vast majority of organizations cannot run itself on one sort of funding only. It is akin to running a shop and having one major customer. That is bound to go wrong one day. Yeah, it's not going to happen. And you could be the best mates ever, that customer and you. It's not going to last forever. There's a moral problem that I think I mentioned before here. If you are 90% plus run by, say, UK funding, are you really a non-governmental NGO anymore? Or are you just an underfunded government department? Question. So that's a moral problem. How independent would you be to rage against the government? This has been a major question. Number 3 is just good sense. Would I really want to invest a lot of money into UK fundraising right now? I'll leave that to you. I'm sure the UK will come back. I'm not sure the UK will come back in the next 4 years. The tax revenues are not going anywhere in 2022, 2021 and 2022. The forecast, if you just open the World Economic Forum, statistics are pretty clear about this. The countries that make the most tax revenue, this could be a very simple metric. Have a look which governments make the most money and which governments have a donor history. It's not sophisticated. You're automatically landing at the Netherlands, the Nordics, Germany, sort of Western France, and the US. Yeah, invest there. What can I say?
And Carolyn, did you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I think I'm fine. I think Chris covered it.
Yeah. And sorry, one last question again. I was fascinated by, I think you mentioned this, Chris, in your case study, but you said when talking to the staff, they said in terms of innovation ideas, they said, "Oh, we've had these ideas for months, if not years." And I'm sure that I reckon that the reason I latched onto that was because I recognised that feeling that you've somehow had these ideas, you've not been able to unlock them. So how, I think organizations tend to have all these ideas that then, quite often you're thinking, I need to think of some new things, but actually the new things may exist already within your organization, you've just not been able to bring them out. So what advice would you give to an organization to help those ideas to emerge? How do they engage with staff or the board or whoever, whichever stakeholders they have? How do you get those ideas out in the open and better utilized for the organization?
So the sort of two things there. Number one, we've looked at innovation in the sector. Back in 2018, we've done an internal large study, and we found that those NGOs which used to be more innovative continue to be more innovative. There's an innovation reinforcing cycle. That's, feels intuitively logical. But what's interesting is it wasn't about the people. We had organizations that had 70, 60% turnover of staff, and they still continue to be more innovative. Now, correlation doesn't mean causality. Maybe the new blood in itself brought innovation, whatnot. But what was common to all these innovative streams is two things. They made a specific space for innovation to happen, a safe space where failure can happen as well. Innovation isn't a charismatic guy coming in, convincing everybody to do something and then it works. That happens once in a lifetime. Those are the multi-billionaires of this world. Innovation is managed. And there are organizations, not just in the NGO sector, but also in the private sector, which are inherently more innovative. And what sets them apart is that they manage innovation. They capture ideas in a process. It's like anything else, frankly. It's rather mundane, frankly. It's not magical. They capture a process, they check in, they give their teams a little bit of funding, a little bit of time of all things, and some energy, apart from the day jobs, to cultivate it, to nurture it, to fail, or to scale. Or sometimes, yes, it worked at this scale, but it hasn't worked so far, here we go. And to use one of the most innovative organizations that we all know, Google, until very recently, they had Crazy Friday. That is a global rule where from 11 a.m. onwards on Fridays, so you could still do your day-to-day business, 11 to 5 on Fridays, you can either go out and party, well, that's out of the question, or you can do work on whatever you want. They scaled that back to their web developers only. An amazing technology has emerged from this one. Also amazing failures. But if we look at Gavi, for example, an organization I'm happy and proud to support, they had a constant innovation hub, where if an employee or a partner, they've extended it to outside, had something that could work, either incremental on a program or completely new, they have the right in the statutes to go to the innovation hub, which is digital now, of course, it used to be a physical space, and try it out. And every idea got a minimum of 2, 5, 10, and then later 30K of funding to try it out. And there was so much funding available per quarter or per 6 months, and then there's a process you can give it a hug. There's maybe a committee that so where you pitch in a Dragon's Den scenario where your innovation idea. But that is not only fun, it's also innovative, and it's actually hugely interesting for what it does to employee satisfaction. I remember when I was finance director at Save the Children in South Sudan, some pretty good ideas came from the guards. And all they did is sit down and chat. Okay, well, that's actually a cool idea. Whether they are the best to run it is a different question. But structure a process around it. That needn't be rocket science. Keep it simple and give your employees the time and staff to do it.
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, there's a sort of, there's a kind of mystique surrounding innovation, that it's some complex mystery that you need to find a consultant to do it, or you need to, there are labs, there are catalysts, there's all this language, particularly the language, I suppose it's the language of futures as well, which is very, well, no, I can't think of a nice word to use, but it's a very kind of self-referential and promoting in some respects. And I think I think one of the things we've done with these webinars with Chris, if you boil it down to kind of concrete actions, it's all doable. It's actually it's not complicated.
If you want to run a marathon, start with a few sprints. Start with 100 meter and then do that and create a space in your daily routine to practice running. Innovation isn't something out of this world, isn't out of this ridiculous things. I'm currently involved with Bristol University in the study of running innovation in the technology sector and transporting that to our sector. So that will come out next year with Adrian, who probably knows something. The idea is, innovation is like any other process. Manage it well, and your chances of it succeeding will increase. Don't manage it, And the innovator would not only need to have a brilliant idea, it would need to work. They also need to be charming, convincing, somehow have access to a budget. So innovation is only possible at the top level with budget holders. And then they need to be afraid of not losing their jobs. Well, who would innovate then? I wouldn't.
So I think we'll call that a day. I'll call it a morning, call it an afternoon, depending on where you are. And thanks to Chris and Tom and Karen for really, really interesting conversations. I think we're due to have further webinars with Chris and MZN over the next few weeks. So do look out for those. Always interested to hear what you've got to say as participants, and thank you so much for joining. Lena's put an evaluation form in the chat box. If you could just let us know, we're keen to know what you want us to talk about. But also take part in the bond funding working group and anything, and keep a lookout for other events that we're running. But thanks again to Carolyn, Tom, and Chris. Huge thanks to you, and stay safe, everybody. Look forward to catching up with you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Nice. Bye. Bye. Bye.